Welcome to issue 86 of the Steve Incimino Says Boom Show.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to POPXP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the POPXP channel.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Steve Incimino Says Boom Show, issue 86. And Steve, this show is based on an idea by you because of all your yapping and all that stuff. So I said, you know what? We got to do something for Steve here. So before we get into it, now what's going on, brother? Tell us what's up.
All right, what is going on, everyone? And as you know, look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live or when we upload some awesome content. And everyone, the challenge tonight is we're going to count how many veins pop out of Steve's forehead.
Or his neck, too.
Or his neck, right?
Yeah.
Does he have a neck? Does he have a neck there?
Well, okay, Steve, as you know, I wanted to, we get a lot of guests and all that stuff, but we always go into the market and stuff that's happened. Obviously, you're a big Overstreet guy. Didn't you just recently write that article in Overstreet about what's going on and what makes it so good? Oh, yeah, there you go. And what makes it so good is that Steve is at the pulse of the universe, of the comic universe, because being at Torpedo Comics, you're one of the most popular comic book stores and in the whole country. And so you got a good awareness, not just being in Overstreet, not just being on Pawn Stars, but also being in the heart and soul of what's going on in the market. And to compliment you, I got another guy that is absolutely, he's a hot ticket. Very big online, travels all over, especially to Japan and back, and knows the market. But Steve, before we bring him out, tell me what we're talking about today and why you have a bone to pick.
Well, here on this podcast, I think we've intentionally been staying away from contemporary comics and market and, hot books and whatever it is. Because, it's not really a subject that, that makes me happy. And so I wanted to bring something to this show that's real because, yes, I am a fan of the old stuff. Silver and bronze. Yes, big fan. Been there for a long time. But I'm still working and doing inventory at the store. I see what's selling. I see what's not going on. I see the previews magazines. I talk to customers, I talk to people, and I have some frightening prospects. And I've been around a long time, and I wanted to bring my frustrations out on this show for the first time.
Yeah. And once again, for our little guest here too, another guy that is is in the pulse of what's going on because he travels a lot, goes to every convention with me, on his own. I mean, the guy's everywhere, but he has a great awareness of what goes on the convention circuit, what works. And what I like about this guy, he does something a little more unorthodox. He gets the sketches, he gets the autographs, and he gets the variant covers, and he's made a great business. And one of my best friends in the whole industry, let's bring him out, Mr. John Stanley Bolerjack.
Boom.
Hello.
And you'll notice he has the biggest head of hair than anybody else on this panel. Only because I shaved mine. I got the full head of hair. These other two jabronis, they got nothing. They got nothing.
I got a little nervous when you said John Stan. I thought you were going to say John Stamos, and I was like, you booked the wrong John.
All right. So, John, what we're going to be talking about today is the current state of the comic industry. And I think you and Steve are two guys that really, I stay away from this stuff because I don't go anything after 2003, and I think it's garbage. But that's me. But I understand what's kind of going on in the market, especially through Steve and through you. But so, John, in your opinion right now, since you got a great awareness of what's going on, what do you think the current state of the comic market is?
Well, first, I would say it's interesting, too, because Steve and I sort of probably are living on the complete opposite sides of both probably collecting and the market. So it's interesting that we'll kind of between the two of us probably fill out the whole thing.
Yeah.
Pretty evenly. I mean, I will say that to Steve's sort of initial thing, I mean, I strictly just sell modern comics. I probably don't sell anything older than the 80s, and that's very sacrilegious, I'm sure, to Steve. But the thing is the comic community is pretty tribal. I've noticed that there's not a lot of like blend over. Usually, you're collecting one or the other. There's not a lot of modern guys that also go, get Silver Age and vice versa. But yeah, I mean, I would say right now, and Steve's probably seen it too on his end, is we had a really big oversaturation of people who, sort of weekend warriors who picked up a collection at a swap meet or, got a taste of that COVID, Donny Cates, Venom, everything was, popping off money and sort of thought, those guys that came in, it kind of reminds me of the guys that got into comics in the 90s where, they do an issue of some comic you never heard of and buy a house and they thought it's going to last forever, and sort of like, and so there was a really sort of big influx of that. And the irony is just as, you can only do that for so long and the bubble bursts and then, you don't have the connections, you don't have the experience to keep it going. And I feel like sort of just as some of that was starting to taper off, then, apps like Whatnot, which to be frank, I use all the time. I make a ton of money on it. I have nothing bad to say about it, but Whatnot sort of was the life raft that sort of helped keep those people in the game even longer. And so that sort of gave them sort of a second life. And now I see some of them are starting to sort of taper off. But yeah, the modern market, I don't know about the Silver Age and Golden Age, Steve would have to talk to that, but the modern market right now is like a real, I wouldn't call it a bloodbath, but it's very competitive. That's a nicer word. It's very competitive because people like me who are trying to run a real business with employees and, make real money, you can't compete a lot of times with a guy who just wants to turn $1 into $5, and sort of like, and that guy's always going to undercut you, especially now because, I mean, not that eBay is new or anything, but I live in the middle of nowhere, Texas. You could live in the middle of nowhere, even, cheaper, and you can grind out that extra money and, your competition will be less because you don't care that your rent's $400 and, sort of, it's sort of puts you at a disadvantage if you're trying to make any significant money as opposed to just getting by. I mean, I don't know if Steve has sort of seen that, on his end.
Yeah. What's funny, John, like what you were saying is like, I love your approach because obviously you have a lot of connections in the field. So you get a lot of different signatures. You get the remark on there and stuff. But what I also saw that I thought was pretty cool when we were in Texas, there was that girl and that other kid. They were like a young. Remember that?
Yeah. I still talk to them. Yeah.
I thought they were together, but they're kind of together. But yeah. I love the fact that they were kind of traveling around and trying to make a buck too, trying to, on the fringe.
Well, yeah, that was the first time I'd seen it. I mean, I'm going to be turning 40 this year, so I guess I have to sort of admit that I'm not necessarily young anymore. But I used to be like I used to be one of the youngest people in the room, sort of trying to hustle. And I did notice that as the older I got, I was still the youngest person. So, I was 30, I was 35, and I never really saw anyone kind of like younger than me sort of hustling. Cause you see, everyone at the shows, who the people are, and so it was kind of, and they're Whatnot people. So it was sort of the first time I had seen people who were pretty young, sort of do it. And I sort of got, I shouldn't be excited because they're going to be competition, but I sort of was like, okay, you have to keep that new blood in there or the whole thing dies, I guess I could just turn the lights off when it's over, but you kind of want other people there to sort of be to picking up the torch. You know?
I thought that was exciting too to see them,
Yeah.
because I was like, who are these, like, you know, these young, this, and a girl in it too. I thought that was cool because it is so rare. Like, I don't really see that.
Plus, I could tell they were hustlers, because if you go get 10 comics signed by Roy and all you have to do is donate, you could flip those 10 books for good money on pretty low, turnaround. And those guys were in that line, for quite a bit. So I could tell that not only were they, they were good at it, they had a plan. They weren't just kind of messing around. They seemed to take it pretty seriously. So
right, and that's what I liked about them. They had like a plan. Oh, I see that all the time too. I love that. All right, Steve, what do we got?
Well, obviously, we're talking about the retail aspect of it right now when it comes to, movers, hustlers, whatever it is. There's always been that in our industry. And this last year, Torpedo has been fighting those headwinds. Jonathan is 100% correct. Believe you me. During the pandemic, everyone just seemed to have an enormous amount of money. I don't know where it came from, because I do know that there were some checks that went out, but people were spending $1,000 a week. Mm-hmm. I don't know how they did it, but the industry got bloated, completely bloated. From the beginning, people who started off with, dollar books, moving all the way up to the Silver Age, where a $15,000 book was now $32,000. And people were running around, and it was just one of the most serious cases of utter greed I've ever seen in my life. I haven't seen greed like that since 1993.
Yeah, wow.
Now, as you know, I have been working retail since 1993. I've seen basically everything in the modern market. I've seen all the twists and turns. But there was always the stability of stories, the stability of characters, and the stability of creators. Right now, we are at a juncture in time where not only are let's talk about the big two. The independent scene is completely different, and I know Niall can talk at length about the independent market. But when it comes to the big two, they're being attacked by themselves and from people who are coming in and joining the employees. Their own marketing teams are destroying everything. And then secondly, they have people beginning to work for the companies that don't actually like the characters or the universes. They feel in their hearts that something is wrong, and they have been brought into the industry to fix it. So back in the old days, when Stan was handing over the reins and certain stuff to Roy loved the stories that Stan was doing and loved all the concepts, and he just expanded upon them. And he was like, oh, I love this, I love that, I've had these ideas. Jump forward to now, we have creators coming into our industry who are being greenlit by strange editors. And they're saying, I always hated these characters because they did this, this, and this. And I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I want to write this, I want to retcon it out, and I hate this and I hate that. Well, then what are you doing working in a Marvel or DC? Go and do an independent book if you're unhappy that way. So they come out with stories which are inane, and people like me and John Cimino, we can't get into those stories because they are inane. We don't want to, read a whole story about, Galactus being non-binary. That's not going to interest us. Okay? But when you have people on the interior who are that way and pushing those agendas, that hurts because they are insulated from sales. Both companies are owned in huge, massive corporate structures so that people can come along and they can have the most ridiculous ideas ever and still get paid, and the books still get printed, even with 11 or 12,000 print runs. That doesn't help us in the comic shops, doesn't help anything at all. And then secondly, their own marketing teams and their sales divisions are literally cutting their own throats. I want to give an example. Recently, we just had a brand new collection come in. and I had to go through and do an inventory. And I'm going to use The Amazing Spider-Man as an example. The Amazing Spider-Man from 2014 to 2022, okay, has had 5 different series that started. Out of that, there's 159 variants.
Oh my God.
159. For example, the series that came out in 2014 only had 21 issues. It had 51 variants of issue 1. Now,
51.
51.
Oh.
So, both Marvel and DC have realized there is no market for reading. What they have to do is get money from people who are collecting and rely on the collector's instinct. We all had it for a while where we were like, oh, I've got to have everything. I've got to buy it. I've got to fill my runs. These days, you'll have people buying 10, 15, 20 versions of one single issue, and no one's reading it.
Oh yeah, that's
No one's reading it. So there is no market right now, because I swear to you, if they stop doing variants next week, within 1 month, the industry would be gone and folded, and only stores that had huge, big selections of silver and bronze would be alive.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. It's true because the stories don't hold up, like you said. The focus has shifted so much. So if you want to get the market of the actual story development of what they're doing, like you said, Steve, they're not focusing on fans. They're trying to bring in new readers, right? Because I can't, we don't like the way Captain America does his things. We want to make him this way. We want to make him that way. And we want to target people like us who like it. But their target audience is not reading comics. The problem is the guys that are still trying to read comics are the guys that have been reading comics, for 25 years, 30 years. Guys, me and Bolerjack, we're going to be 40 this year, right? I mean, but we've been reading comics for probably over 20 years, or into them at least for over 20 years or more. Yourselves, you guys are, 40 years. Who knows what it is? But anyways, the problem is the stories aren't there. Now, you have some good writers out there that are trying. I've had conversation with Scott Snyder. They're trying to improve things. I went up to him and said, when are you gonna take control? When are we gonna fix things? Your stories are good. What's going on? He laughs and he's like, we're working on it. But I mean, that's the thing, is their target audience are not comic book fans. They may like the movies, they may like the shows, but not the comics. So that is the market now, and it has been for well over 10 years, is the variant cover market. That's how we get people. That's how they come in, because Scotty Young's hot. Scotty Young was on everything. People were spending hundreds of dollars for a Scotty Young cover. I mean, that was the focus. And, my buddies who own comic shops, I mean, that's the thing. It's like they laugh. We're just selling these because of the variant covers. But in order to get some of those covers, they have to buy X amount of books. So now you're talking like the retailers are now they have to take these books they had to spend so much money on, and in a couple weeks they're going in dollar bins because those variant covers aren't going to sell. They want the key ones. So the focus again needs to get back to stories, needs to get back to character development, and that's where I have to say, when people say American comics versus manga or something like that, I mean, manga story wise crushes what's being put out in the American comic industry.
Well, it's actually funny you say that, because it's really interesting to hear Steve talk, because Steve is a man who you can tell hasn't been crushed yet by the reality of the situation. He's still got that hope in there. He's like the rebellion.
He's crushed, but he's still sticking strong.
He's still got the hope to change it. But I think the thing is, for me too, look, I have not read a comic. Like, I've not read 5 straight issues of a comic in probably over a decade. The last thing I read consistently was like Walking Dead and Invincible, probably the last 2 things that I hung on for, and then I'd piecemeal stuff. But I mean, also look, separately of that, when something becomes a business, it becomes much harder to get time. It becomes more of a job and less of a fun thing to do. So at least for me, but I think the thing is, there are 2 completely different ecosystems in comics right now. There are modern comics, which are just trading cards, to Steve's point. The interiors doesn't really matter. It's the interior actually at least in my eyes, only serves original art collectors. It's just an easy way to get art from a guy because he's doing a book. But you probably didn't even read the book you're getting the art from if you just like the artist, sort of thing. So to me, the modern market right now is pretty much just trading cards. And to your point about all the variants, they're just other chase cards to those, to those things. And then, so and to me, I've just sort of accepted that as the fate, of just, this is what it is. And I have to maneuver in that space to sort of make that work. Cause I don't want to go work a regular 9 to 5. I want to be able to take naps at noon if I want. So I got to make this work. But I think the other problem is that this older market, the Silver Age, Golden Age stuff that Steve's in, is that there's really, if you decide you want to feel that passion and go, okay, I want to read stuff, I want to read good stories, even if you want to read 2000 stuff, early like that. The problem is that there's a very, I think there's a very closed off sort of people who sell Silver Age books and Golden Age books, are very sort of insular and sort of there's this very sort of protected community of this is our thing. But secondarily than that, you see it when you go to shows. I guarantee you, Steve, if you remember going to a show 3 years ago and some of these dealers, you could find books in those boxes then that are still there now, because they refuse to just accept that a Tales of Suspense, whatever, 106 featuring Globman and Nick Fury is worth $5. It doesn't matter. Unless it's super nice, if it's a 9.0 or it's a 6.5, it's still a $5 book because it's just not, interest is not there. But these guys will keep it for $30 and you'll end up buying the collection when they're dead, at a Ramada Inn in Toronto on their 5th year in a row of never stop going to shows, because they refuse to accept that, some things are worth stuff and a lot are not. That's just the case. And I feel like they keep this price wall kind of arbitrarily high. So for the guys who buy modern stuff, like my customers, they're not going to pay you, $65 for some random Fantastic Four issue because it's the first issue of, Radion Man. They could go buy, a new book that they like that's shiny and cool, and they at least, feel like they got something, and I think sometimes that actually fuels the customer base to stay buying the modern trading cards, because they're not going to overpay for some old book. You know what I mean? I think that's definitely a great point. There is definitely a demarcation line. And the reason I can say that with, some certainty is, at Torpedo, I do one sale a week, usually. I do it on Instagram, and I'm the silver bronze guy. And I will come out with some silver and bronze, it's usually on a Wednesday during the day, and I have a certain amount of people. I do some sales here and there, but, unless I have something super high grade, nothing spectacular is going to happen. However, when my grading partner, Will, has a sale of variants, wow, there's people coming out of the woodwork. And you're right, 100%, Jonathan. They will never buy a Silver Age book or definitely not a Golden Age book, okay? But they will buy 500 copies of Do You Poo. Dude, don't get me started on that. We're in full agreement on that.
But during the pandemic, you notice that some of these people, they meandered down into the 70s and went the keys. And so they would always be like, I want a House of Secrets 92. I want a Hulk 181. I want to get a giant size X-Men. Okay. And what they were doing was they were ignoring all the body books that you're talking about. Tales of Suspense, regular issues of Captain America and stuff like that. Now, the reason they don't have to buy those books is because back in the day, when me and Semino were youngsters, there was no nice reprints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we had to go in those back issue bins and build our runs. But for us, it was, I want to read the story. So when I went to the back issue bin and a dealer, and they had beautiful high grade books on the wall, Mylars, and they were like $85 a piece. I was like, well, I want to read. Do you have the same books that are cheaper? And the guy would point down to this box and go, yeah, they're $5 a piece there. So that's how we were able to put our collections together. Mm-hmm. These days people have options. They can go online. Yeah. They can go and read it. But there again is another disconnect, because I find that the universes have changed so much that a modern reader cannot break into the style of a 60s or a 70s book. They cannot break into it.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it. I've tried to share those older stories with youngsters, and they can't do it. The same way that I can't break into modern books. Mm-hmm. If I'm reading a modern book and someone is using a curse word or something like that, and I'm like, why is that character swearing like that? They never did that in the old days. Wait a minute. Why is that character going to have sex? What in the hell's going on? I thought this was supposed to be a superhero comic. There is a divide. There is definitely a divide. And right now, a lot of people already have a lot of books if they're collectors of silver and bronze, and they may be upgrading. They may I want to buy a CGC of one of my favorite books. I want to get a 9.6 or a 9.4. But generally speaking, in the old days, a new generation of people were always coming along and saying, "Oh man, I've just started doing this, and I'm getting my Batmans right now. I'm doing the issue. I'm in the 300s, and then I'm going to do the 400s." Does anyone see that anymore? I don't see it.
No.
No, and John, what's funny with you is you are that opposite end, because you've made such, I don't know how many times you've sold a variant cover of a variant cover of a variant cover of I see all your stuff, and it's just like, and it's once again, you do a little something different. You get the autographs, you get the remarks on it, you make it a little bit, you spice it up a little bit, but you can reprint or repress or do one of those classic and they don't even care about what's in the story and all that stuff. They just want that cover, especially like the Hulk 181 or like like an Avengers 57. They just want that. But you also do that with the Japanese stuff too. So
yeah. I was gonna say to Niles, because Niall brought up the manga stuff, and that's what sort of had got my brain going. Is I go to Japan about once a month or so, and I buy a lot of stuff over there, and I bring it back here. And I don't buy the manga per se, because you can get that here anyways, and it's also in English. So I get more of like I'll find a Spider-Man 300 that was printed in Japan, or and so again, it's like a trading card because they can't read it, but it's at least different, like you've seen. We've all seen enough Spider-Man 300s for a lifetime, you're not excited by it anymore. So I try to find stuff over there. But to your printing numbers, a new manga volume will come out and sell like 2 million copies. You know what I mean? Like it comes out like once every 3 months or something. You know what I mean? Like once every 2 months, and they'll sell a couple million, and they're selling. And I'm on the train, and I will see like a 65-year-old businessman, reading it, in the actual book, and then I will see like a teenager on his phone, and there's all different, kinds of people are reading that stuff. It's essentially if Steve would be in heaven if he was Japanese, because not only would be the tallest man there, but he would also be able to have comic conversations with everyone at all times, because all walks of life are in that zone that Steve is sort of lamenting doesn't exist here. It is there, and I mean, there's a lot of factors to it. I mean, even just from a work ethic standpoint, those guys that do manga are essentially like slaves to their own grind. Like they work nonstop, and they'll put out something for 20 years, you know what I mean? Sort of thing. Like they're hard workers, and it keeps that, there's no conventions, there's no distractions almost. Like I talked to some animators that I'm friends with, and they said, I tried to get them to introduce me to other artists, and they said, we're artists because we don't want to meet people. Like it's sort of like, they're very to themselves. So that's how they can do this breadth of work, because they're not distracted, and they're not, and they're, I mean, just as a work ethic, Japan's pretty strong on top of that. But yeah, I mean, that's the biggest difference I see. And then you talk about, they'll make 20,000 copies of Batman a month, and that's like a success, and it's like, you couldn't even get a meeting in Japan if they knew you'd only sell 20,000 copies of their, manga. And that's just within Japan. Worldwide, I mean, they're just crushing it over comics.
Yeah, the funny thing is
they're weekly too.
About a year ago, I began to hear about this massive success of manga sales. And when I looked at the numbers, because you can't get any sales, any figures from Marvel or DC about what they're doing, but you can get the stuff from bookstores. And the bookstores release the sales figures, and they are astounding. Millions and millions of books being published and being read and being collected. So about a year ago, I began to seriously take a look. I would go into a bookstore and I would look in there and I would see how they were organized. And I began to, I'm not a manga fan. I actually had to crack open the books and take a look and see what was going on the interior. And then I have a lot of friends who are into manga, and I began to pick their brains because I was like, wow, there is money out there. There are people who are willing to purchase. Why isn't it happening in American superheroes? That's why we're not talking about some, independent stuff right now. There's all sorts of great writers out there, single creators doing stuff, and they may be getting 15,000, 20,000 people a month reading a story about, two trees that are bending in the wind. But when it comes to like huge, franchise characters, the main difference is, and I'd really like to see what you guys think about this theory of mine. The basic concept of the manga books has not changed on the interior for 30 years. The basic concepts are the same. Right. If you're dealing with a fighting book, okay, you have these characters in there, you see them on their journeys, their quests, they're getting powers, they're getting some sort of artifacts, but at the end, there's always two guys standing on either side of a mountain or inside a volcano, yeah. And they're just powering up, and it's like, whack, and people, and the art is incredible, and the characters are being, that's been going the same thing for 30 years because it works. And people are coming in there and they're saying, oh, I've been following my character. Now, of course, what also is successful for them is the fact that those characters are in their own universes. So when you go to a bookstore, you'll see these volumes. They don't filter out to 5,000 different titles. And then secondly, if they do something a little odd in their genres, and believe me, the Japanese can get very odd in their genres, they do it separately and don't bring it into the other books. There's that whole genre of books where, you have two guys that are very amorous toward each other. They don't bring that into, your regular fighting manga books and say, well, you have to accept this now because we want to bring this into this. They keep it separate. So that's not happening in American superhero books. The people in charge are basically saying to the reading populace, we believe that you need to adjust your reading, and we're going to help you that way. You're going to start reading this now, and there's a message that we want to send, and we're going to put it in there. That doesn't happen in the manga. The characters are still fighting out there, and there's planets exploding. They're diving down into volcanoes. And when they come out, they're not saying, well, when I was younger, my father kissed me. They're not doing that. They're not doing it.
Well, some are, but we won't talk about those.
Again,
that's a different genre.
If they do, it's in their own genre. And when you go to a bookstore, you'll see it. If you're interested in it, you angle your way toward that. But if you are one of the mass populace that have been following your character for 30 years and say, oh, this character beat this one, and now has these talismans and can do this, okay? You're interested in that. They don't throw an X factor in there and then say, after 25 years, oh, by the way, your character isn't even a man. It's a woman now.
Well, I think what Steve's actually, I think the thing that hit, I think that Steve's saying that I think like that kind of struck me was when he was talking about like when you do see manga, especially in Japan, when you go to a store, it's like you look at, you're in a store and you're like, there's like 1 billion pages in here. Sort of like it's crazy, when you see the breadth of work. But what you're talking about is that when you go in there, it builds confidence that what you're reading is going to be good because you see like 800 volumes of it. And that like, it feels consistent. It feels safe. That if you pick up one, look how many I have to go. And you're sort of on your own journey by reading through them, but you also know that they're not going to abruptly stop or turn into one of the 800 miniseries that you're going to have to follow and cross over. You could just read this one thing and you don't have to, and you don't have to even look around. You can just pick your one thing and then you got like 5 years of work ahead of you to sort of, to run with that. And there's something very sort of safe and makes you, secure about that option that you're about to invest all this time and that it's going to be there. You're not going to read 6 issues of something and then the guy's going to fall off and you're never going to get the last 5 issues of a story, or that you're going to be able to read it and there's no at least in manga too, when something is the first appearance of a character, let's just say, if you have the original Shonen Jumps from like the 80s, 90s, 70s, that kind of thing, like I have a whole room full of them of stuff I paid way too much money for. So those, sure, like those you can go if you want that collectability thing, if that's your thing. But if you want to spend $4 on a AF-15, version of the manga, it's $4. Like in the 181 is $4 because there's 10 million copies. They're not rare, and so nothing ever. There's no paywall that gets in the way of your reading. Like you can just go there for the story, and that I think that is like a sort of a huge leg up that they have. And then the other thing I wanted to tell Steve is he'd find it interesting is that the offshoots that you were talking about, like when suddenly two male characters are very amorous towards each other, that's not even in Japan, even though they have extremely strict copyright laws. You can't even if you live stream drawing Sailor Moon, there was an artist who was promoting a school for drawing, and he on a YouTube live drew Sailor Moon just for fun. He got sued for drawing the character on a live. But somehow while that exists, it's called doujinshi. I can't say it, doujinshi, and it's basically fan fiction. But it's like allowed gray market fan fiction where young aspiring artists will draw like a 45-page Dragon Ball Z story, publish it themselves. It looks professional. It's beautiful. And it will be an entire floor imagine a Walmart, but had an entire floor of bootleg fan fiction that was completely allowed, that looked professional, there are guys like, imagine Do You Poo, except it ran 20 years and it was amazing quality and it was different stories, and so that exists there. And so that stuff you're even talking about shows the quality, because you would see it and think it was like an officially licensed thing, and it's not. It's just fan, eventually they use that to go pro sometimes, but it's a very weird system they have over there for, here you try to do a Batman thing, you're going to get stomped right away. But, there they allow it to sort of grow, and, then some artists turn pro and some, do that forever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
and they're there to consume though too. The Japanese, like they're consuming these books for entertainment. Like they're reading these books. And that's why, like you said, there's 10 million copies, 12 million copies. So it's for them, if they're collecting a run, it's because they truly enjoy the series and they will go back and reread that series. Yeah. Where here, again, there was a time when these comic series, Batman and stuff, I mean, you're up to, 400, 500. They kept going on. People were dedicated. They were buying. They were reading. That fell off. Manga didn't do that. And there's also... Sorry, I just Googled it. It said that One Piece, the manga series, guess how many copies total of manga One Piece has sold? One Piece has been around forever. It's probably over 100 million copies. 516
million copies of that book. Those volumes have sold. Of that one. Now that's one series, of like 1,000 out there.
And it's a great series though too. Like it's a fun read. And that's the thing too, like Steve, you were talking about, you look at like, American comics and how you were saying basically ideologies, right, being thrown into them, which they are. There's no doubt about it. It's in television, film, music, everything. Now everyone says the way you were thinking is not right. You need to think this way. I got made fun of now. I'm in power. I'm getting back at you. So they're throwing these things in, and they're heavy in dialogue. You look at manga, if it's a fighting book, if they're on a quest, right? If it's an adventurer's journey, there's dialogue, but not much. There's a really good balance of story and visuals, and they keep it with hot chicks that the Japanese readers and American readers want to bang, and the same hot chicks are the ones that the girls want to be. So it's very classic, and it holds. And that's where honestly, in America, it's like, well, their body, that's not realistic. We can't have that. Men aren't that muscular, but it's like, but this is our mythology. These are the gods that we, worship and love the stories of. I mean, that's why we have it. I know I'll never look like Superman, right? Yeah. And most women will never look like Wonder Woman. Yeah. They can, but again, in Japanese culture, they just are there to read the story. They like those visuals. It is their culture. Here, comic books have not become our culture. It's now an IP. It's an IP control.
But I think you sort of segued into something that's also very, very important and people have forgotten. And it's been quietly forgotten because it's something that everyone wants everyone to forget. when me and Semino were younger, and as you said on this podcast, we've told story after story after story of how we would read something in the comics and then run outside and try and enact it. Because we were young boys and we are living on power fantasies, okay? We went out, I'm going to lift this giant rock. I'm going to throw it. I'm going to fly off this roof, okay? It's a power fantasy, okay? We lived vicariously through these characters. And in the old days, you know, from the 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, you know, there was still a lot of action, a la like the manga. So you would see these characters fighting, you know, juggernauts fighting Thor, and, you know, it's like, oh my God, you know, it's fantastic. Okay. And then we could live vicariously through that because that's how boys are. Boys are more active that way. They'll go out and they'll get a hammer and smack that hammer against a brick. Okay, because that's the way we're programmed.
Okay? Steve, give me a second. I would go by construction sites, and there were like the bulldozer and the big things. I'd be like, you know, the Hulk and Juggernaut just fought there 2 hours ago. We missed it. Go ahead.
So that's the way boys' brains are wired. Okay, so we get excited by when, you know, Captain America's coming out and he's beating all these guys, and finally Baron Zemo will be like, well, you've got through all these challenges, but you haven't fought my main guy yet. And it'd be like this huge big robot coming out, and you'd be like, oh, it's going to be next month. What's he going to do? How is he going to do it? Manga hasn't lost that magic. No. And by the way, when they have a fight scene, and I've noticed it, they really they stretch it out. So you see the guy's eyes are getting bigger, and there's blood in his veins, and, you know, and they're like, oh, they're powering up, and as you turn each page, it's like, oh my God, how much power can this guy get? Because it's a power fantasy. There's people who are now working at Marvel and DC who are saying that that is wrong, immature, and has to be changed because that's not the way the world is anymore. There's a new breed of young boy out there that doesn't like that, doesn't lift rocks, doesn't get a hammer. Okay? Because that person is going to love to read a comic that's 22 pages of two characters sitting in Starbucks talking about how they have a brand new haircut. That's not going to work. And sales have gone down and down and down and down. And then they're sitting there confused with this weird look in their face if they're a bean counter or anyone in marketing, or they are oblivious and don't care. There's a famous creator out there that said, if you don't like my books, don't read. Okay? Yeah. They're not listening because they don't have to listen because they're insulated. They go, oh, well, we got a movie coming out. We're going to make some T-shirts. Who cares what's going on with these characters? So when they're sitting there and some guy comes in and says, oh, I want to change the character completely. I always thought this character should be a squirrel. And their editor, instead of saying, get out, because that's what Jim Shooter would have done. That's what Roy Thomas would have done. You know, they're going, well, you know, that actually sounds like a good idea. I know we've had a fan base for 35 years, but I truly believe that they will follow you on your journey as you change this character into a squirrel. I truly believe it. And it's not working. And they're lying. When the whole industry right now is a facade.
I did have a question for Steve, actually, because it sounds like, see, to me, actually, to the way you sort of describe your, you know, your sort of feelings on it, you actually seem to me like you would be the perfect candidate to read manga because, you're not into the comics. And I don't know for you, if you, maybe it's even a subconscious thing that the idea, if Steve starts reading manga, like, either maybe you think you've sold out or see admitting of defeat, but I feel like you're a prime time like target for manga because I was actually writing this graph as we were talking about it because the fighting stuff, you know, is like just a little sliver. Like One Piece is about pirates, Sailor Moon is about girl. Like there's a million different slivers. There's a manga about a guy who's a devil and he gets stuck in the real world and he has to take a part-time job at McDonald's, and that's like a possibility. like there are like millions. There are millions of sort of subsections. Like I guarantee you that there is a manga out there that you or I have never heard of that's 800 volumes long that you would probably fall in love with. Like, you know, and to me, I feel like it's interesting to me that you're not sort of like searching for,
that is actually a really, really good point. And it's one of the reasons why I tell people now, if they're a young reader or I see them in the store and they're coming along, I say, don't get too passionate about what you're reading. Don't get carried away, because I did. I was the complete and utter Marvel zombie.
Okay.
I got into the universes. After I read the issues, I would go into the Marvel Universe handbooks to make sure that everything was straight. And I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand what's going on. I got to a point where I wanted to write my own index. I had a point where I had 15,000 books ready to go at every single Marvel Universe story. That's how deeply involved I was with the characters. I was 100% committed. And people would come up to me and I'd be like, oh, I can't go out tonight. Oh, I'm reading, the Roy Thomas Thors with the Eternals. I just want to, because I want to make sure, well, there's a brand new story that's come out that had a flashback sequence. And I'm, you know what I mean? That's the level of insanity that I got to. And then a lot of people have the ability and had the ability to move on beyond superheroes. They read for a while and they were like, well, that was fun, but I moved on. I couldn't move on because I was invested 100% into that world. I'd be like, oh man, yeah, all the Eternals and then the Inhumans, and then oh god, they went out to space and they've just met this new alien race, and wait a minute, they had contact with the Badoon. I remember those guys. That's how excited and stuff I was.
You were being supported,
and then Steve lost his virginity.
Yeah, but the thing is, at that time you could actually you could do that because the support system was keeping that possible by everything staying in continuity and nothing restarting. So you could build that, you could have that safety net because it was like reliable, which again exactly harkens back to your other thing about mangas having 800 of the same thing, because that's the same thing. It's like essentially manga is just doing what Marvel was doing before, keeping a continuity of a universe together, and not.
Yes. And that's why I always felt sorry for DC fans. And I guess the gods of karma are punishing me now, because, I mean, secretly under my breath, I would laugh and go, oh, those poor DC guys. Oh, man, they keep rebooting the universe. Yeah. Oh, dear, you chose the wrong universe. And here we are. Well, here I am. And I am literally unable to read. Jonathan, I'm in the same situation as you. I've really tried to read a couple of new issues. I'll do 3 or 4 issues in a row, and then something will happen, and I'll throw that book against the wall.
Yeah,
I'm there with you.
Wait, but John, I have to say something. Like what you were saying, how Steve's a perfect candidate for that. I would be too, because I look for the same thing Steve does. But I'll tell you the problem with manga for me, and I bet you Steve agrees here. We're Americanized to those drawings, that type of the Arnold Schwarzenegger physiques and all that stuff. The reason, see, I knew Steve knows what I'm saying. There's something about the manga drawings that are too soft for me. That's not, I understand they're powerful figures and all that stuff, but it just does not work up to like a John Buscema or a John Romita. Like those you have to understand, and me and Steve are these big bodybuilder guys too, that we also look at the lifting magazines. So the drawings of those manga, right? Am I right, Steve? I know exactly. Yeah.
The thing is,
it doesn't turn you on, is what you're saying. Manga just doesn't turn you on.
No, it doesn't.
The thing is, I think though it is too. Well, okay. First of all, John is like Steve's like the guy in Vietnam who's been there for like 5 years, and then John is getting off the helicopter ready to fight the Chi-Coms or whatever, and Steve's like all burnt out, like he's just surviving through it right now. And so John still got that sort of he remembered this in his head, and Steve comes off more like he's actually, and look, and I understand Steve's disappointment, because I remember, I mean, it's a different time, but I remember reading all of Garth Ennis's Punisher stuff, and I remember when Punisher was really crazy, and I was like, I can't believe this is printed on a stand right now. Like it was really, and I remember now feeling disappointed that I can't even open a Punisher book. Like I just want to see the first page is some mobsters doing a deal, the second page is Punisher creeping up, the 3 through 15 is just carnage, and then he gets in his van and he drives away. I understand that sort of level of sort of disappointment, but to John's point about the drawings, I think, I mean, again, you don't necessarily have the need, so you wouldn't need to know, but there's definitely a majority of manga and anime that looks like what you're talking about, 100%. Yeah. But there are things like Berserk and other sort of animes that are pretty popular that look more like aesthetically what I think that you would, sort of there's no teardrops, there's no big mouths, it's very dark and gritty, sort of like there are things out there, like that you could, but you're not really, you guys have your old stuff, you can still go back to that. You don't need to really. It's more about like if Steve was just like, I got to read something, like I guarantee you there's a book out there that Steve would have a brand new full back tattoo of if he found it in Japan, like he would fall in love with if he just found it.
Me and Steve are so like we're cut from the same cloth, like from like the wrestlers, the bodybuilders, the art. I'm just saying, like it's so we're so Americanized, like like Rambo and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I watched Van Damme movies as a kid. Trust me, he wasn't big like Arnold, but I know I remember Hard Target. He's in the flaming building fighting. I remember it.
Yeah. Bruce Lee. It's hard for me because I tried it, and my friend showed me like Appleseed. Those those were great, and I thought some of those girls were beautiful enough. Yeah. But my thing was, like I said, I couldn't get into it because for me it's like I can go through a story that's bad, but if it's drawn well, I can still get into it. It's harder for me to get into a story that's written well, but it's drawn bad because there's a visual component. I need that. I don't know. I need.
See, I'm the other way. I can. If the story is really good, I can deal with it. It's like a low budget movie. If the story is really good, I can deal with.
It's hard for me. I need the good cinematography.
If I see a new Transformers movie, I just want to put a gun in my mouth because I just can't. The story's awful. I can't deal.
And it's like when like you're a big Sienkiewicz fan and like you like that later age. When it started getting a little too abstract, I just couldn't handle it because it was like it started getting a little too weird for me.
Yeah, we've had our long drawn out debates on that. I'll still go to my grave.
That's so funny because I remember those first issues of Moon Knight. Yeah. When he was in his Neil Adams phase, and I was like, "Oh, this is actually." And by the way, I'm not a Moon Knight fan.
Yeah.
Okay. Never was a Moon Knight fan, but at the time, everyone was like, "Oh, have you seen Moon Knight? Moon Knight, Moon Knight." I was like, "Okay, let me have a look at this Moon Knight," and I was like, "Oh, it's just drawn very nicely." And then slowly but surely, I would notice these schisms, and I was like, "What's going on there?" And then same thing. I think the biggest jarring effect, I know we're getting slightly off here, but the New Mutants, we had Sal Buscema and Bob McLeod doing this classic type art. And then you get Sienkiewicz come on there. And then there was that weird story with a demon bear where he did this thing. And I was like, is that the teeth? Where's the claws? And I remember I got to issue 25 and I went up to the person who was working behind the counter and I said, I'm not going to read this anymore. And he was like, no, Steve, this is the future. He goes, he's pushing boundaries that haven't been seen before. And I said, well, he can push those boundaries all he wants to. I'm not going to keep reading them.
Yeah.
So,
we're not getting off topic because what you're describing is of the time. Like before, we were talking about Silver Age people and they have their thing and they have their thing, and they stay there. And it's the same. It is the market exactly as it, because you're not going to push into that. And then those guys aren't going to go back and see Buscema's Conan and they're going to be like, oh, it looks a little like Ramita, and your head's going to blow up because they look nothing alike, but they don't understand it, and so it is what you're describing is in a nutshell, the same thing.
Yes. But then again, it's great for bringing up Buscema, because I remember in 1985, Buscema and Palmer came back on the Avengers, and it looked just like it was the work they did in the 60s. Yeah, that's the consistency that you have in the manga books. Because sometimes I know that some of those creators, they're actually on the same book for 5,000 years. I don't know how they're alive, but they're still doing it. But there's a consistency. So I was able to open up issue 256, and see them in the Savage Land and go, oh my God. And then you could go all the way back to issue 56 and go, oh my God, it's the same style. It's magnificent. The consistency. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of things changing. And if you get to a point where you start getting into the weeds, okay, and someone like me says, okay, I've had enough. That's, again, a super fan and someone that's way too involved in it can get upset. It's hot or cold. It's not meandering. And those people that I used to laugh at many years ago that would be like, what did you think of this great story? Did you see it? And like, yeah, it was good. I read it. They're still reading because they never got that involved in it.
They couldn't be disappointed that much because it was always sort of middle. So they weren't invested enough.
Middle ground. And therefore they were saved from, you know, the cliffs and valleys of, you know, oh my God, this is unbelievable. This is great. But returning to the more, you know, overall picture, I don't see anyone learning any lessons from manga. I don't see anyone looking over there and going, oh my God, did they really sell 2 million units? Okay. Oh, has that character really stayed the same for 35 years? But they're just relying on the creativity of the writers to come up with new situations, but without changing the character so much. That's your key. That's your key. And you have people working at Marvel and DC that have forgotten that. The marketing teams have realized that, you know, well, okay, we have some weird books coming out and, you know, our book has sold nothing. So what we're going to do is that we're going to reboot the issue the series every 3 years. And as I said before, with Amazing Spider-Man, from 2014, 21 issues, 51 variants. Okay? Issue 2 from 2015, 32 issues, 21 variants of issue 1s. Just issue 1s, not in between the issues. Okay? So that's where we are in the industry right now. And looking a little bit darker, I can't see how we escape because we have just gone through almost 20 years of a golden era of exposure to the outside world with all our superhero movies and TV. We really have. We should have had hundreds of millions of people coming in and saying, wow, did you see the film? Did you see this? Coming in the comic shop and buying. It didn't happen. It didn't happen.
You know that. I mean, when the movie started getting big, Marvel had flipped. So when they came in and they wanted to see, you know, if they loved Iron Man, they came in, and when you went on the shelf, Iron Man was a woman. So that it didn't, when all those movies were really coming off, Marvel changed all the main characters to women, and that's what they were promoting. And a lot of new readers didn't understand, hey, these stories aren't new. If you actually want to pick up where that movie leaves off, you got to go into the back issues. And then it was like, oh, I got to read old comics for that. So there was a huge misstep there from how successful the films were to bringing people into comics.
See, well, I actually was going to talk something else, but to this point is I actually feel, and this is not a very popular sort of take of it, but I actually feel that the popularity of the Marvel movies hurt the comics, because before, comics were just there on the side for a very niche. It's like anything else, like video games, like anything else. Like if you have a very niche but dedicated followers, like as much as me and Steve don't like Do You Poo, for instance, it has a very niche but small.
Hey, let's leave Brent Michaels alone.
Well,
He's a good friend of mine.
I want to be very clear. I tell people all the time that Murat Michaels is awesome because he's super self-aware, super nice, doesn't try to act like it's like he knows what it is and he knows he's cashing the check. And it's very rare that someone could be as successful doing that and still have their head
that's
on.
a real title? That's something.
Yeah. I'll tell you that later.
I thought you were kidding. I thought
it's
that's
real.
A real thing.
It's a parody comic.
But when you have a small but loyal market, they spend the money and it keeps the system going. And I think that the movie popularity actually was detrimental to the comics because suddenly all eyes were on it. Before those movies came out, you could do what you wanted. You had like one editor who was overseeing a bunch of books. And if Punisher wanted to do a whole issue where he just cut dudes' heads off, you didn't care because you knew the numbers, you knew who was reading it, you knew no one was going to complain, and they had more freedom. As soon as a bunch of eyes come on it and it becomes corporatized, you have to answer to 10,000 other people, and you can't have the thing can't drive a car because you have a deal with Hyundai for this movie, and now 1 million eyes come on it. So I actually think, and the people that, I mean, first of all, I've never really believed in the fallacy that people saw these Marvel movies and wanted to read, because people don't want to read anything. So regardless of the movies, I don't really think that would have helped either way, but it just you just got the worst parts. You didn't get a lot of new customers for comics. You got new comic customers for toys and for pops and for t-shirts. And you got all the oversight, so you didn't get anything good out of it. You just got more eyeballs, and you got the same or less customers because the eyeballs made the stories change. And so I enjoyed the movies early on, but I actually just don't think, and I think it's proof today when you look at all the new Star Wars shows and the later Marvel shows. It's like that is not good for we're not getting anything out of that. We're getting
It's funny you say that, John, because I was already out of comics, but I started seeing that trend. I could see it because I would still go to the comic book shop and then you'd look at the comics, but I could start seeing that because that's the first time that like the movies were more powerful than the actual comics. That's why like they became that. So they started trying to change up the comics to the movies and all that stuff. Yeah, no, but it's funny you say that because I did start noticing that. And it's funny. And to go back to what Steve said about like I go back to the old adage by what Stan used to say, that he always said, give the illusion of change. You kept the characters intact, but things changed around them, but it always kind of came back to the real source. And I always thought about that, and that's why that's not even a case anymore, because now these heroes, the characters are so different from what they were because of all this. But that illusion of change, I always remembered that when Stan said that, because that's how I kind of live. And when things start changing, like going into the 80s, into the later 80s, the stuff that you like, John, it started getting too much for me because it started, like I said, things started getting too abstract. Things started getting too, like, it just didn't make sense to the way I grew up on comics, and it was changed. Now things were like radically changing and all that stuff. So that's what.
And I did want to ask Steve a question just from talking about the market, like from the boots on the ground level, from like a retail side. For me, like I'm seeing right now on the modern side, there are some really like name brand guys out there who sell variants. Every week they have a new one and they have 10 at a comic show. But I know on the inside, behind the curtain, on some of these guys, they are having like $100,000-$200,000 Penguin Random House bills a month, because to do a Marvel book, you got to buy 3,000 copies of the cover A, and then you can buy 15 of the cover B, and you got to pay the artist, and they're doing 3 variants of. And that money just stacks like crazy. And I see these guys, they're just working in these huge numbers, and they're just barely hanging on. They are like 2 bad variants away from being gone. And some of those guys are falling by the wayside. Some people have gone out of business, some people have gone bankrupt, and they're falling. And I would say that at least on the modern side, there's probably, I would say like another 50% of them, of the big timer guys, that are going to have to fall before we get sort of like a course correction and less of those variants and more, but on the Silver Age side, because those books are printed, there are new books. Like from your perspective on the Silver Golden Age side, is it still oversaturated? Are there still too many dealers trying to do it, or do you think that's not a factor sort of in?
No, I don't think it's a factor at all. I think you bring up numerous great points, by the way. I think that we're going to see more stores opening that don't sell new issues.
Because I've seen a few of those. Yeah.
Because it's just not worth it. Because I've watched my employees who are dealing with the companies, Diamond and Luna and all those guys, they are pulling their hair out. The books aren't arriving. Boxes are going missing. They're having to order, a tremendous amount of product. And we at Torpedo, we had to make some concessions. And we're like, well, we aren't going to chase this variant. We are not going to order 3,000 books to get this one variant. We're not going to do that.
Oh.
So when someone comes along to the store on the Wednesday and says, do you have the J. Scott Campbell variant 1 in 3,000? Sorry, we don't have it.
Even if they did, they wouldn't want to pay for what it cost anyway. So they
yes, again, because they have no idea, because they can't understand or visualize or put it in their mind the concept of someone ordering 3,000 books to get one. So there's a little bit of a disconnect right there with people, coming in there. It's like, well, if I buy this 1 in 3,000, I'm going to send it in. I'm going to get it pressed. I'm going to make sure I get a 9.9. I'm not going to sell it for $15,000, and then I'm going to go to Hawaii.
That's John. That's John's business.
You know,
That's John's business.
you might get one or two that you can do that, but the sheer amount of pressure that it's going to take to do that is earth-shattering. And secondly, more to your point on the pressure on the actual stores themselves, I think you're going to see slowly but surely people aren't going to get involved in actually doing comic shops and dealing with new issues. I do know, I have a friend of mine who has a store in California. He does not sell any new issues, and he's the happiest guy in the world. He comes along to a show. He's like, hey, I'm always asking him, I'm like, hey, how are you? Like, how are you doing? And how are you bringing in new people to the store? Because when you have new issues, they come in on a Wednesday, right? Yeah. They come in and they're looking around.
That's usually the lifeblood of the store is that.
Yes. Yeah. So to me, it was like, well, how are you going to do it? How are you going to bypass that? And the way he does it is he just advertises a new collection coming in all the time. And people are coming in and they're buying, and he manages to good. And he's going to live forever. He's like, hey, I'm doing good. I'm working at the company. He doesn't have to deal with any of that crap. And I truly believe that we are going to lose maybe within about 5 years. I think we're going to lose about 5,000 stores across America. And I think you may have some online people, selling stuff like that. And I really do think that we are going to have a contraction. And then there's going to be some tough decisions that have to be made by the corporate masters. Because I think at some point when the bean counters come up to them and they say, by the way, you do realize that you lost $86 million this year, right, on the publishing division? Someone finally is going to go, what? Okay, let's examine what's going on. Right now, they don't care because they got the T-shirts and the mugs and whatever it is. And they're like, oh, we've just got licensed and Netflix wants to do this. They're going to give us, $8 million. At some point, something has to break. And with no basis and no creators coming in, because let's face it, if you are a massive creator that's coming in with ideas, why are you going to work at Marvel and DC?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
Go off, do your independent book where you have all the control. And if you can be like Eric Larson and just do, almost 400 issues? I mean, that's insane. Okay. Or you can be Todd and then, you also have your runs, but you'll notice that both Eric and Todd kept the numbering the same. They didn't keep rebooting. Because they don't have to, because they're not under that pressure. So someone comes along and says, I collect Spawn. And I go, yeah, I'm on issue 386. And they're like, look at that, issue 386. Whereas a modern person that's collecting Spider-Man is like, well, I've got volume 7, volume 6, volume 5, volume 4, volume 3, volume 2. And I have 159 variants in the last couple of years. By the way, I'm also bored and I'm going to be leaving. I'm going to stop reading pretty soon.
Yeah. And what you're describing too is why I expanded my business into Japan, because it's like I have no competition there. I have a ton of competition here. I have zero competition there. And I don't even have a ton of money like some of the really, really big guys. But even then I've spent like over a decade cultivating these relationships. So even if someone shows up with a suitcase of money, they don't know where to go. They don't know who to talk to. They don't have people to vouch for them. But I had to diversify because, even as we're talking right now, this is a giant stack of Pokemon comics, and I have to get an animator who worked on the show to sign. But I'm the only one who will have them in America, and that's like I have to diversify what I'm doing because I don't want to be one of those dead people. You have to I have to outlast the other 50% who are going to die off, and then I'll be okay. But I have to do something in order to sort of.
Hey, I got a question for you, John, you and Steve. What is the endurance on those variant covers? Like, let's just say you get that 1 in 100 or 1 in 50. Like, right off the bat, I know they sell for big money. What is the lasting? How does it last? I'll
say this, and this is a hard truth that I'll probably, some people would push back on, but ratio variants are an illusion. They're a scam. And the reason that they are a scam is because, to Steve's point with those variant numbers, right? So a Spider-Man 1 comes out. If you're a store of the 51 stores or whoever that do the exclusives, the variants, you have to order 3,000 copies of just cover A. 1 in 100, that's 300 1 in 100s that you're gonna get, or whatever, 30, however many 1 in 100s, 1 in 50s, 1 in 25s. When you're done, you have a stack that's like, I have 51 in 100s, I have a 500 1 in 10s, and you just dropped like 20K on a Marvel book. So you are shitting your pants because you need that money back. So immediately you're like, I look at this 1 in 50. I'll sell it to you for $40 because you're trying to claw that money back.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is when you have 51 of them, I'm not a math whiz. Someone else will have to crunch the numbers later, but 51 times 3,000 divided by 100. That's how many 1 in 100s are out there. Like way more than probably what Teen Titans sells regularly. There's probably more, 1 in 100s of that book. And so it's just not rare. So you can, in that first week, you can con someone into being like, hey, this is 1 in 100. It's only $40. We had to spend $3,000 to get it, whatever, and you can, but they filter through, especially with Whatnot now, like those, you can bang those things out. eBay, you had to at least put them on eBay and hope someone bought them or run an auction for a week. Whatnot, you can have those things blown out on day one. So like the ratio game is just a scam. You should buy it if you like it. If you like the art, if it's a trading card, that's fine. You should buy it, but you should never buy it under the guise of like, this is going to be valuable. That's just, and I never, even my customers, I never tell them that. Like it's, I can't run a business like that way, even to my own detriment, scamming my customers, because they're going to figure it out, and then they're going to feel really burned, and then they're just not going to trust you. So I don't even sell ratio.
Yeah, and again, to that point, John,
yeah,
the ultimate pulling back of the curtain is if you give it a couple of months, you just look at the CGC census on a certain book, and if you've been lying to people, and then someone says, "Oh, hey, there's 400 9/8 of this issue."
yeah.
How? But I thought that's what breaks things.
Yeah.
But it's also a beautiful tool, because when you do see something and you're like, wait a minute, there's only 12 9/8. Oh, okay. So consequently, there's an issue with Amazing Spider-Man. I think it's issue 650 something. And we sold a 9/6 copy for $12,000.
Is it the one? Is it the black and white one with the city upside down? And
yes.
Yeah, my friend just got one of those graded in Baltimore, 9/6. He got that at the store as a fan at like the Uniqlo collab he got. Yeah.
Wait,
yes.
$12,000?
Yes, there's only 200. Only 200 came out.
It was at New York Comic Con. You had to like get a coupon, go to a Uniqlo clothing store. They'd give you the book, you had to buy a certain shirt. So it's way too much work for most people.
It's a lot of work.
And the guy died like 3 weeks later.
I have heard a 9/8 sell for $23,000.
Yeah.
But when that news filters down, everyone thinks that all the other books are going to be the same way.
Yeah.
And that's why you get all these people online, professional flippers.
Yeah.
And also it goes into what Jonathan said earlier on about these fly-by-night people who turned up out of nowhere all of a sudden. And they may have been doctors, or plastic surgeons. And they're suddenly like, oh, by the way, I'm also a comic dealer.
Yeah, exactly.
But what's the staying power on that 12?
Well, that book, by the way, fun fact, Steve, my friend saw that stream and that's what showed him how much that book was worth. It was sitting in a box at his house and he saw that stream we were talking, because I remember he called me and he was like, I just saw this book on Torpedo, and he went and he found it in his collection. But so the staying power like that, it goes back to what I said, a small niche market. You only need like a certain amount of people to pay that price, and there's only 200 of them, and of those 200, most of them probably aren't probably not in high grade, so that you just need the small niche market who's willing to pay it. You don't have to worry about all the other things. That price point prices you out, of like you're only.
But again, John, to your other question is, and believe you me, but this last collection that we just got in had 4,000 variants. Okay. Now, lucky enough, I didn't have to price them.
I know. Oh my God.
Will went through and did all the research, and he works right next to me, so he was able to say, "Oh my God, this book in 2022 was 800. I'm pricing it at 250 now."
Yeah.
And again and again and again and again. So what we've had is an attrition. All those people that came into the industry thinking, well, this is going to be a way to put my kids through college, which if anyone, back in 1993, I kept hearing that, like, by the way, I have a long box of Death of Superman. I'm going to put my kids through college.
Yeah.
Get away from me, you idiot. Okay. So the funny thing is that things never change. We, as humans, have been the same, basically for the last 10,000 years of civilization. And we are always going to make the same mistakes, and someone's always going to come along. And it's always the same, when there's an announcement that's, like the Red Hulk is going to be in Captain America, and suddenly I'm like, oh, we're going to get the Red Hulk #1. Oh, is there a variant? La, la, la. And it goes up and up and up and up and up. And then the film comes out, that book goes down and it's absolute pack.
That trend line people have kind of started to get aware. It still happens, but I have noticed a sort of tapering. But to John's point about the thing I do that a little different than a lot of the people who are selling and flipping is that, so I'll get like a regular book signed. It's like a regular cover, say, that people like, and book costs $5. I'll pay $5 for the book. I'll pay the person $20 to sign it. So I'm in at $25. I pay another 30 something to grade it. So I'm in that book like $50, right? So I'll sell that book for $100. Now the thing is, anyone with the time at a show could get that book on a newsstand, or not a newsstand. That makes me sound old, like a comic store or whatever, and get the book. They could do the work themselves if they wanted to. But what I'm selling them is not having to do that. Convenience. So I'm not trying to get astronomically more for them, but I'm basically come to them and go, look, you can do this yourself for $50, but you can get on a plane and the hotel and the whatever, or you could pay me $50, stay at home, and get something you think is pretty in a nice case. It's like a nice big trading card. And that's sort of what I try to sell, because that's easier to sell than, hey, would you like to pay $500 for this 1 in 50 variant of a something is killing the children 38 that means nothing. You know what I mean? Sort of it's a random issue. Like, that's for me a way harder sell. I'm never going to get you to pay $200 for some crazy book. Just pay me $100 and I have it in 50 and I just double up and I move on. That's a much easier sort of way. And I don't have to burn anyone in the process of getting them flavor of the month. And then 2 weeks later, it's not worth anything and they just never buy anything from me again.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Now, winding down here, why don't we have a last question that each one of us will answer?
While you guys read the question, I want to show. I have a gift for. I should send it to Steve to see, but I want to show him something. Speaking of manga and Marvel, so do your thing, and I'll be right back. I want to grab it for Steve.
Okay. All right. So first off, Steve. Steve, just the people out there have to understand how me and Steve are so alike. The first time we met, remember we went to dinner with we had with Roy and John, and you took us all out to dinner. I just want to throw this out there. And me and Steve are talking, and it was like we were finishing each other's sentences. It was like everything he liked is exactly what I liked, and it was vice versa. And we we couldn't even finish our steaks. We were we were getting so crazy about, oh my God. And even on this podcast, we start noticing how we're like Danny DeVito and Arnold, in Twins. And I'm Arnold, of course, and you're all the best. But it's seriously. I know exactly what Steve's thinking when he's talking manga and all that stuff, because I know exactly what I'm thinking.
It's just that I think
you should dive in.
I feel sorry for the more modern audience, because I truly don't believe, John, that they're going to have the same thing that me and you had, where we would open up an issue and then we'd read it like 9 or 10 times and then stop at a panel and go, oh my God, look at the Hulk's hands digging into that metal and he's pulling it up, and then I meet someone like you and I can go, oh yeah, can you remember? Yeah, it was a Hulk 272 when the Wendigo scratched the Hulk's chest. And you're like, okay. Because it meant so much to us and because the stories hit us on a certain level. Okay. And again, we do have something in common. We did like the wrestling and we both went in the gym and you know what I mean? So we both get it.
When we're doing the shoulder presses, you're like Road Warrior Animal and you think but one more thing, John, before you're going to show your thing. But Steve, one more thing is that is the I think the greatest thing about the comics is going into school the next day or talking to a friend and did you see that fight? Did you see that fight in Hulk 272? The Wendigo got that. That is missing, because now it's did you get that variant cover? I paid. It's all consensus. It's all, that's a 9.9. I could care less about all that stuff.
Yes.
Did you see that fight, Captain America and frickin'?
It might have been possible, John, if we'd been able to capture the younger market. And I think it also goes into something that Jonathan said earlier on about, and by the way, it was an incredibly pertinent idea. I agree 100% now. I haven't thought about it before. but I also agree that the movies did have a detrimental effect on certain things. But I remember back in 1992 when people were coming into the comic shop and they had been watching the X-Men cartoons and stuff like that, and they had gravitated toward the comics. They came in and said, "Oh, I love the cartoon, but I'm reading the comics now." And I was like, "Oh, wow, that's what's happening now."
Because you saw Wolverine on TV and you came in and he looked like he did, and it was the same.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So if we had, and by the way, there's been countless animated things going on, some anime, especially DC's animated far better than the Marvel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, but this influx of young people never came in because obviously times have changed and they're on their cell phones and they're on TikTok. But generally speaking, that was the audience that I thought were going to be coming in from the exposure to the films, the youngsters, not the old people, not someone that's like 35 years old, really old at 35, going and watching a movie and then coming into a comic shop and going, "Well, I really like Tony Stark. I've heard about this thing called Armor Wars. That's not going to happen." What I was hoping for was that someone who was young, 7, 8, or 9, went off, saw a movie, and then finally, when they got introduced to a comic shop or came across something, and they were like, "Oh, hey, Mum or Dad, can you get me this? I saw this on TV, but look at this. There's a whole book of it." That never transpired, and that's, I think, another one of the sad things that's happened.
Before we wrap up, I think I did want to say one thing because I forgot to say it earlier, and Steve, we can always talk about this other time. Is I do feel the only time the modern mentality that I saw really leak into old comics was like 6 months ago, a year ago, when everyone was selling their right testicle for a pre-code horror book. And it was like, it just became a trendy thing to show that you had it.
Yes.
I just could tell, I was like, none of this is real. Like in 6 months, they will be over this. Like it won't matter. It just became a very trendy thing and then was gone. You know what I mean? Like, and I just thought that was really interesting that suddenly that became like a thing. But okay, Steve, what I have for you to take you down some memory lane is this is a Gene Colan original. This is a Gene Colan original drawing. It's like it's an Avengers cover recreation, like in more detail, obviously.
Yes.
But it's got the whole team there for you. It's got everyone. I got this like 15 years ago at a random comic like meetup, but I thought you would appreciate that because it's kind of like this is
that's a thing of beauty right there. That's something that if your house is on fire, you go through the flames to get it, my friend.
Yeah,
you go
so
through the flames.
I keep that, but I have two other things. There's 3 other things I'm going to show you real quick, just as a thank you for you guys. So, and John will like this too. Marvel, the Marvel Con 76. This is the flyer that you got. What's it called? The
program.
This is the program.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's signed by all these old timers. I got a sketch on the back by Keith Pollard and Al Milgrom.
Oh.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, you got Ramita, you got Stan, you got Larry Lieber, Sinnott, you got Marv Wolfman, Roy Thomas, and Sprinkle. They all had panels and stuff at the. So this is
that's
one of
beautiful.
them. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's
incredible.
You got that, and you got this, the bigger. So it's both convention books signed by all the people who, like a lot of people who had panels. I actually have the insert of this that has the panel times for what they're talking about on each it's like typewriter and then copy.
John, you're gonna have to pop that open, and you got to have Roy sign it. There's
Roy did sign it. I have these signed by Roy.
He did sign that one too.
But the last thing I want to do a little show and tell is this is my pride and joy. It's a creepy magazine signed by Frank Frazetta and Warren, the publisher, Bernie Wrightson, and Neil Adams.
Holy shit.
Frank Frazetta only did like 2 CGC signings, and they weren't like official. Like this was, I think he had an art show or something, and this was signed there. But it's not one of his wife's signatures. It's the actual, he signed it at a art gallery.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's all 4 guys are gone. But yeah, it's just my like pride and joy of collectibles. So at least it's older. It's not a variant. That's all I can say. It's not.
No.
That is so cool.
I mean, the difference is that what you showed us there, that's history.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's real history. And I mean, obviously, some of these creators have been gone a long time.
Yeah.
And, it's a little touchstone. Obviously, it's even more when you're there, when someone signs it. But if you don't have that opportunity, you know, I mean, who has a Frank Frazetta? You know, hey Frank, can you sign this?
Exactly. Yeah, that's
You know?
the other two I got signed, and that's part of the journey too, is like finding these guys and getting them and keep, you know, and that was part of the that was part of the fun, is trying to track those guys down. You know?
Yeah, that was all. And that Gene Colan one reminds me of like the Roy Thomas, John Buscema run. You know, when Goliath and
Steve,
Yellow Jacket and
because I mean, according to John, when I spoke with him, he went on vacation and Gene came in to do a couple of issues.
Yeah, and Steve will appreciate this. Steve, guess what I traded for this? Guess how I got this? I traded an Error Walking Dead 116 variant that was just some book that never should have got sent out. It got to one store in England. I got my hand on one, and it at the time was worth $3,000, and I traded it for this. And so it's like the best trade I ever made. Is I got this for a variant I mean, right now it's worth $500 probably.
John, you should have Roy sign that one too, because that's during his whole run.
I don't know how Steve feels, but you can't have Stan or Roy sign original art. It's got to just be the person that it's got to.
Oh, okay. Well, you can have him the glass.
Yeah, I sort of agree.
Yeah.
If you have a piece of original art, you can't allow anyone to come in there and touch it afterwards.
Yeah.
All right. So the last thing we wanted to say, like, we'll just each answer this question. Like, and we'll start with you, Steve, then we'll go to you, Niall, then John. What do you think? Okay, we've all had our little say on the industry right now. 5 years, where is this industry? Good, bad, ugly? Steve, you go first.
I think it's going to be in the dregs. I really think that if it continues the way it's going, I think people who are actually reading stories are going to be dropping, and it goes into something that Niall said, which was very pertinent. If they keep appealing to a tiny little audience, they're going to end up with a tiny audience. If they don't change their ways, there's going to be a lot of silver and bronze age dealers and gold age dealers, and then there's going to be a big gap because there's going to be hardly any new issues out there.
Niall?
Yeah, no, I think the industry is going to keep going down, especially in the retail end of things. Like, I said earlier, with what their focus is and who they're focusing on is not the core fans. But this is going to be the transition that you're going to see is with the crowdfunding, with the independent publishing, self-publishing. You're seeing it now with the biggest names in comics. They're still getting their names out there. They're still doing stuff for DC with Marvel, but they're starting to do a lot more on their own with their own IPs, crowdfunding them and self-publishing them. And that's where you're going to see it. And that's where I want to tell everyone, you want the good books, you want good stories, you want good art, go check out the independent creators and check out the stuff the big guys are doing independently, because it's far greater than what they're doing with the IPs that are out there.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I agree with Steve and Niall. I think that you're going to see just a continued, from a strictly sales standpoint, just a lowering and lowering. I think we're gonna weed out a lot of weekend warrior types that, who hangs in there. But I do think that I don't think there's really an end game in the sense of like the eyeballs are on Marvel and DC now. Even if you're selling 8 copies, they'll just stop making comics and they'll just make TV shows and still sell the same. I don't think there's really going to be because everything's just too corporatized now. So I think you guys got the luxury of living, John and Steve, in the time where that was it. That was like the golden age both ways, but I don't think this, this doesn't sound very sad, but I don't think the stories ever get better. I think this mentality where we're at, I think is about it. They'll get crushed down more. Some people will get bounced out, but new comics are trading cards. Old comics are nostalgia. And I think Niall is right. The only thing people are going to be reading are going to be sort of the independents, but I think you're always going to have people who love Spider-Man or had a lunchbox as a kid, and they're going to want that shiny new foil book. And I think, I think we're sort of seeing the final stage of it, and it'll change here and there, but I think we are in sort of like the just last phase of what we're in. And so I think we just got to make the best of it. Now, Steve, you got to start finding some manga, man. I'm going to send you a couple of things with real strong, well-drawn.
I converted 2 years ago.
Something.
Steve, I dove into it 2 years ago. I hated manga. I hated anime. I couldn't stand it. I despised it. And then I actually gave it a chance, and I consume more of that than anything else.
We're gonna get you, Steve. I'm gonna find the biggest, manliest one. I'm gonna get you.
There's a lot of weird shit though. There's like one like making dinner in a dungeon. It's like
Yeah,
that's the
we'll
whole
find
They have
something.
weird shit.
John's a lost cause. He'll never return, but I might track. He's a little more.
Yeah, as long as it's not Mason Ikuku, I think it was the title.
Well, the one thing I wanted to say about, first off, comics have been said that they were going to die since the very inception. I mean, if you think of how many years comics has been around, I mean, hell, when you know, friggin' when Roy was getting into it, they were saying comics was going to be dead. Like they were even telling, you know, I'm just saying it always kind of perseveres in some one way or the other. But my one thing, I won't be reading it no matter what. I'll still love the heroes. I'll probably still buy that shirt every now and then, but yeah, unfortunately. But Steve, one question about Overstreet. Would Overstreet ever put out, I don't know how they do it with their price guide, but what do they do with variant covers? As eventually they're going to put out they should put out a separate price guide for variant covers?
It's a very good question. And believe you me, I've been right there at the cutting edge of that because 4 years ago, I did a rewrite of the Amazing Spider-Man price guide listing, and I included all of the variants. It took me 6 months of work to pull the variants out and get the pricing. And I got a very nice email, and it basically said, Steve, we can't publish it like this. So what you're going to see is all the variants and stuff like that are going to appear online on the Overstreet Access, where they have plenty of breadth and room to do as many as they want to. But they're never going to be able to do that actually in the Overstreet guide. And I think that slowly over the years, as all of the dinosaurs, including me, move on and go away, I think the sales on the actual Overstreet guide will drop and drop and drop, and the people taking notice of the online access that they're doing is going to raise and raise and raise. It's just the same way as you don't have horse buggies anymore. I just think you can't fight progress, and so that's why you're not going to see that.
Yeah, technology. All right, so hey, check out John at Arch Rival Comics on Facebook. He's always there, and he's even so nice to the haters. That's what's great, right, John?
I'm nice. I'm nice to the haters. A couple of guys out there, they don't like me very much, but I still like them. We can still be friends if they want to be.
You're a little more hated because you're with me now too. So there's a little more.
John did up. I had my own thing going, but John really took me to that next level. So I'm making the big times now.
And Steve, obviously, Torpedo Comics. Always watch Steve on Steve Says Boom. Always watch his little shows and his little soliloquies and all that stuff. And Steve, I love it. And now, obviously, the crowdfunding and know what's going on in that independent scene because, hey, we still love this medium, and that's why we're doing this. And hopefully people out there, they enjoyed this one. So, okay, Steve, get us out of here. Thank you, John. Thank you for coming here, bro.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on POPXP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the POPXP and over on Instagram at the POPXP. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you soon.